Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. To you, Lord, I'm grateful, Allah the sustainer. For sins I'm remorseful, Allah the forgiver. For blessings I'm hopeful, Allah the bestower. Gracious and merciful, Allah the creator. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar.
العالمين والصلاة والسلام على أشرف الخلق أجمعين وخاتم الأنبياء والمرسلين سيدنا ونبينا وحبيبنا وحبيب إله العالمين الرسول الأمجد المحمود الأحمد أبي القاسم محمد. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. The subject of principles of faith, and we are still discussing the attributes of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And we have discussed in the previous sessions about the positive attributes of the divine essence of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We discussed about His might, about His knowledge, about His life. And today we will discuss about His irada, or the willpower. As we say, He is all willing and He has a willpower. So what do we mean by willpower for Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? And as we said before, all our discussion is to elaborate one point, that we should not contradict Tawheed, oneness of Allah, and His absolute oneness of His essence, or Tawheedul Dhat. And we say all these attributes has to be explained in such a way that will not contradict His absolute oneness. That is the most crucial question which comes about each attribute. So about willpower, what is the willpower? For a human being, usually when we say he has a willpower to decide to choose one of the things, you say it first, the person will think what to do, and then he decide. There is a decision about his doing it. And then when he decides, then he has a readiness to act something, and then he loves to do something, try. So all that psychological effects are there. And then at the last moment, his willpower will work and will choose one of the two things that he wants to do, to go this way or that way, to do this or to do that. So all these are phases in preparation for doing something. You say he has willpower to do or not to do something. So all these are preparations for that, preliminary factors, prerequisite factors, to have first knowledge, and then thinking, and then readiness, and then let us say love to do something, and then have the willpower and decide to go ahead and do something. This is what we understand the willpower literally. But is that the same with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? That Allah, if you want to create, for example, a creature, that He will think, is it useful or not useful? And then He has a love to do it, and then He decided, and He'll go ahead for that and take a final decision, and then create something or not to create something. Is that with Allah? Naturally not possible, because we said Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not change. His essence will not change. And we are going, inshallah, to discuss in the negative attributes that these all weaknesses are negated from Allah. And anything which will bring need for something or a change of a situation is not possible for Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The change means He was at a state, let us say, unwilling, neutral, let us say, and then he decided, so a new situation comes, and that new situation, as we said, is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. If that is the case, then how do we understand the word that Allah is all willing? In what way? So all the issue about this attribute is to understand it in such a way that will not be like willingness of the human being. We say Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, laysa kamithlihi shay, nothing simulate him. So his all willing and my willingness are not the same, because my willingness has all that preliminary factors, but Allah's willingness does not have that factors. So that is one issue. The second issue also here is that, is the willpower attribute of the essence of Allah, the divine essence, or attribute of his actions? We say certain attributes are attributes of his actions, like he is creating, or he is giving livelihood, and so on. But that are attributes of actions. So is the willpower attribute of the divine essence, or it is attribute of his deeds and actions? Which classification we have to choose? Well, still among the Muslim scholars, some put it as an attribute of the divine essence, or others they said no, it is attribute of the deeds and actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, we are going inshallah to discuss this point and see the views of different scholars. Because it is a very delicate matter, there were a lot of discussion and confusion in Islamic history and Islamic ilm al-kalam, the science of beliefs, among the scholars in the history of Islam. From beginning of Islam, especially at time of the Abbasids, that came, and it was very hot issue to be discussed about it, and so many views are there. And as I said, all the views which are mentioned, their aim is to negate any need or weakness from Allah, and to explain it in such a way which will not make the divine essence as a compound, to remain simple. So you should understand in a way to that will still possible with the understanding of simplicity of the divine essence. So no composition here to be there. So how to understand it? So you see all the scholars, everybody has his own view, but ultimately we see what Ahlul Bayt Salamullah alayhim has explained is really the final word and the best and the exact one. So we are discussing these issues for different scholars in order to elaborate this matter. The Ash'ari, who are the leader of the principles of faith for the Sunni Muslims today, they follow the Ash'ari school of sect. For them, they said the irada is belief of benefit of something, which is antagonizing with hating, and that is belief of not beneficiary or not usefulness of thing. So if you believe something is useful, that is the willpower. Why you decide, why you go ahead? Because you believe something is useful. So what to explain the irada of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that when Allah believes something is useful, He creates that, and we call that His divine will. And if He hates something or find it unuseful, unnecessary, unimportant, then Allah will not create that. So He say He has no will power to do it, or has no will for that, because it is not good. So Allah is not in favor of that. So they explained the will power or the divine will as the belief of benefit of something. Now here, of course, the argument will come that belief of something is not a cause for a creation of something. The belief is part of knowledge, part of ilm, not part of the willingness. Creation is part of might and willingness. So the belief alone is for the knowledge side. There must be something else other than the belief, which is called willpower. I may believe something is useful, but then I will not decide to move, or there are some preparations, something. So knowledge is one of the stages for the willingness. But after knowledge comes willingness. I know, and then I am willing, So they are two different things. Now, to explain the will of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala about only knowledge of knowing good things, and that is why they are created, so we are actually negating the will and say it is only knowledge, nothing else. Well, anyhow, that is one of the views. The second view is called, it is the psychological desire which happened to the human being because of the belief of a benefit of something. So that desire, when he knows something is useful, he will go to do it. So that psychological desire is what we call it the willpower. So their explanation about the will is that the psychological desire for that. Well, again, this is very incorrect answer, because to state the willingness is only the psychological desire is not sufficient. Sometimes one has no desire and still do something, like a bitter medicine, for example. I don't like to take the medicine, but then still I will take the medicine because I am forced for my health or for my. So it's not really that love to do something for that. Sometimes we have love to do haram thing, but still we do not do it because it is haram. So always love will not be the willpower. Love is something, part of our psyche, part of our psychology, but the willpower is something else, So we may like something, but because it is haram, it is illegal, we will not do it. So willing and loving is two different things. We cannot say it is the same. The will of God means when He wants to do something because He has emotional affiliation toward it, so He will do it. So we say that emotional affiliation is the willpower. No, emotional affiliation is not the willpower. That is a different matter. Of course, beside that, this type of change, emotional affiliation, is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. But at least now we are explaining what is the willpower, how to explain it, what is its definition to understand it. Again, others, they said it is a psychological situation which comes between the knowledge, the definite knowledge, and practicing something or doing something. When somebody knows something is good and wants to do it, so want here is between the knowledge and between the action. So they explain it, it is the psychological situation between the knowledge of benefit of something and doing that something, which is the action. So it is a state between the knowledge and the action. Sometimes they say it is the psychological desire, definite psychological desire to do something that is the definition of the willpower. Again, like this, even if this definition, suppose it is right, again, this is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because it shows that there was no desire and then a new desire has been found. So here we are explaining the desire to be contingent. And we say attributes of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are not contingent. Allah will not change, the attribute of the divine essence are part of the essence and are not contingent, So even, if that definition is elaborating the meaning of willingness, but that type of willingness to say that Almighty God has first knowledge and then a psychological decision to do and then action to do, so that psychological decision in between the knowledge and the action is the willpower. Again, there is no contingency about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, this definition is not doesn't look very proper. Now, other than the let us say definition, what are the theories to explain the divine will of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? What is the divine will? And as I said, all their efforts is to negate complexity within the divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That should be complete tawheed. So all these explanations, the scholars, they say, if they say it is something coming in, then contingency, or there is a change, or complexity, and all those possibilities are not correct for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what is it actually, the will of Allah? Allah, murid or irada, what is that irada? What is that definition of that? How to understand it without making a complexity within the divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So here the well-known philosopher and scholar Sadr al-Muta'allihin or Mullah Sadra, he said it is iradatuhu ilmuhu bil-aslah. The will of Allah is His knowledge to what is the best, what is the most good things to be created or to be done. Because he said the will actually, according to him, is that knowledge. When Allah knows, then things will be created right away. There is no thinking and decision and love and affiliation and so on. All those processes are not there. When Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows something good, then right away that thing will be created, because everything good is possible for Allah to create, and He will create. So actually the meaning of the divine will of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, according to Sadr al-Muta'allihin, is His knowledge about what is the best for creation. And because Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is all perfection, so He creates what is the best, and that knowledge right away will create the change. So here, knowledge is one of the attributes of the essence of Allah, as we discussed before. So there is no complicity here. His knowledge of the best to create will create things, and that is called His willingness. That is again is for Sadr al-Muta'allihin. Here, we have a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam. He says, al-ilmu ghayr al-mashi'a. Because the argument with what Sadr al-Muta'allihin says, he said, the knowledge is the willpower itself. No difference. He knows what is the best, and then it is created right away by knowledge of Allah. So that explains the willingness is the knowledge, nothing else. Actually, we know that knowledge is not the willingness. Knowledge is let us say, prerequisite for our decision to decide to do something. I know something good, then I will do it. But then it is two processes, not one. In that case, I am actually removing the willingness of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is nothing called all willing, He is all knowing and create everything by His knowledge. There is no all willing, because He said it is the same as the knowledge. So actually I am negating one of the attributes of perfection of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that explanation does not seem to be right, And a hadith from Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, he says, Al-ilmu ghayra al-mashi'ah. The knowledge is other than the willingness. Don't you see that you can say, I will do such thing if God wills, and you do not say that I will do this thing if God knows. You see the difference between knowledge and willingness. When you say, they say, okay, I will go tomorrow to Toronto, for example, if God is willing. I will not say I will go tomorrow to Toronto if God is knowing. It's not possible. So if knowledge is the same as the willingness, then it is right to say, if God is knowing, then I will go. But that doesn't look right here. So it shows that the knowledge and the willingness are two different attributes. We cannot say it is one. Actually, the willingness is the one which decides between two sides of doing or not doing something. You stop at the middle, you know this is good, or if not done is not, or that is not good, and then you decide to take an action in one of the sides, to do, not to remain neutral. So that is the willingness, not the knowledge itself, So that explanation again may not be the right. Of course, we believe that knowledge is one of the prerequisites for the willingness, far prerequisite. But again, the willingness is near to the action. First there is knowledge, willingness, and then action, doing something. It is a prerequisite for the willingness, otherwise why one decide to do this and not to do that, because there is a knowledge, but it is different from the knowledge, not the same. So we cannot say it is the same as the knowledge. No, it is different than the knowledge. The other views of some other scholars, they say إرادته ابتهاجه بفعله. The will of Allah is that He is satisfied with what He has done. What Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has created, He is satisfied with His creation. So His satisfaction, which lead to creation, is called His will power or divine will. It is actually that type of satisfaction. Because if somebody will and is satisfied about something, then he will create and he will do that thing. And because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is satisfied about His action, so He make and create, and that satisfaction which lead to creation is called the will power, that or all willing. Well, again, they said the reality of willingness and the reality of satisfaction are two different things. Satisfaction is something, and to have to decide to do something or not to do is something else. So we can't say that willingness is the same as satisfaction, or let us say happiness, or liking something. So again, that is not the right definition. I mean, these are all the views of so many scholars, Muslim scholars. I'm not going into details which one, brilliant one, in what book. Only in general, I am saying the view in order to elaborate that how much this subject is delicate and important, and so many views are there for scholars, but still sometimes they will not say the right thing which should be said about it. The third view, he said the meaning of His will, that He use His might and majesty to create things. So using the might is actually the will power here. So He made it as one of the attributes of His actions, like God is creating, and God is giving livelihood to people. So that is also using His might, and that is what we call willing. And he said, the Holy Quran said, إِنَّمَا أَمْرُهُ إِذَا أَرَادَ شَيْئًا أن يقول له كن فيكون, his order or his affair, if he is willing for something, this willing, irada, will something is to tell it be and it will be. So that is the meaning. Well, again, here the answer may not be very exact. There is still an argument about it. We said the willingness, is it optional or it is by force? One is forced. To say he is forced, of course, is not possible, because Almighty God is not forced for doing anything. If it is optional, not forced, so what is that optional thing? To say that he can do something by his own will without force from outside. What is that? The might is something else. But what is that willpower, which is say that willpower, he is not forced and he's free completely to do something or not to do. Because as I said, it is either compulsory or with freedom. To say he is forced to do something, not possible. Nothing is forcing Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When you say the willpower is with his freedom, he has willpower. So what is that freedom of willpower? The might may be different than this willpower. So again, the explanation is not very exact about its meaning. They try to explain it, but they may not reach the right target. Well, again, the fourth view, and that is a view of Allama Tabatabai, the author of Tafsir al-Mizan, the exegesis of al-Mizan, the well-known philosopher and scholars and mufassir of Qur'an. Well, he said his irada, his willingness is nisbatu tamamiyatu sabab ila al-fi'l. It is the relation, when we put it, between the completion of the cause to the effect, to the action. When we relate the cause to the action, so that completion of that relation is what you call it as the willpower. Because for anything to happen, there must be a cause, and then when all the causes are complete from all sides, then the thing will be created, will be existing. So that relation between both of them is called the attribute of irada. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is called murid. He has the willingness, and what has been created is what he wished to be created. So he is willing, and he created what he wished to be created. So explain in that way, it is this relation between the cause and effect is called the irada, or explained as the irada. Actually here, he said that we can take the attribute of irada, we can extract, let us say, the attribute of irada between the causes when they are come together and the effect of those causes. So here we extract something, an attribute, that there is a willing, that is why the cause was directed toward the effect. So this is what Allama Tabatabai says. Well, again, some other scholars, they said this also may not be that, because if that is about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, sometimes people do something but not willingly. They are forced to do it by force, threatened to do, and they do something. So where is the willingness here? He did, yes, there is a cause and effect. He did as a cause, and then something has been done as an effect. But there was no willingness to do. There was a force to do it. So this definition will not elaborate that where is the willingness. Unless we say that even those who are forced, actually because of other factors forced, but when they did something, they willed to do it. They wished it to be done. They used their willpower, though the force is from other factor. But ultimately, if you are threatened to drink water, for example, and you drink it, so you have the willpower, you did it, you drank it, though you were forced for it, but ultimately you decided to do that willingly because of that effect. Of course, there is nothing forcing Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to create, but the definition according to Allama Tabatabai is they say this relation is called irada. Whether I was forced or not forced, then when I tried ultimately, whether by force or complete freedom. But again, according to some, this may not make a clear-cut difference between the irada when somebody is doing it willingly or irada when somebody is forced. Of course, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala cannot be forced, but again we are talking of the definition of the irada and its meaning, you know. Well, the fifth view, they said, well, simply we can say, as the Holy Quran says, and as riwayat of Ahlul Bayt salamullah alayhi said, that we said that Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, He is all-knowing, all-willing, and has His might, and nothing force Him to create or to do something. So this is one of the attributes of perfection, like other attributes of perfection, and it is not coming in contingency or not in a sense that God is forced to do something, because all that is not possible to be understood. Actually, to elaborate this view more, he said there are four possibilities for something to be done. Either what we do it without knowledge, and that is of course not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Sometimes we do, but without willpower, like fire is burning, but there is no willpower for the fire to burn. No. That is another possibility. And again, that is not correct for Allah. Or he says somebody has a knowledge and willpower, but he is forced to do something because of external force. Somebody is asking him to do, and he cannot deny his request. Again, that is not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the only way which is right to be understood, and we say is possible for Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, that He is all-knowing and is all-willing, and what He is doing after He knows what is the best and what is right, and nothing is forcing Him to create or to give sustenance to His creatures. So that is the way we understand it. It is one of the attributes of the divine essence, and in that sense there is no force to say Allah is forced to create. You say, no, Allah is not forced to create. He created with His own willingness. Of course, what He created with His own willingness does not mean it has no, let us say, wisdom or philosophy behind it. Naturally, Allah will not create something for no reason, for no purpose, in vain. No, there must be some benefit in its creation, and depend on the wisdom of Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So He said He is all-knowing, almighty, and has willpower, all-willing, and He create whatever He create by His willpower, and nothing forcing Him for that. That is, let us say, in short, we understand it, and that is what the ayahs of the Holy Quran talk about. The will is like that. Now we come to some of the traditions of Ahlul Bayt about the willpower, which are very important to know. From these traditions, we can see, let us say, the willpower has two levels of discussion. One level about divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the second level about His deeds, His actions. So one of the divine attributes of the divine essence, that He has the willpower. Now whether He create or He will not create, He has the willpower. As we said, He has knowledge, whether there is something to be known or there is nothing created yet to be known, that does not mean He has no knowledge. Knowledge of a human being is such that something to be known, to be there, so I know it. But for Almighty Allah, even something which is not there and not created and will be created after millions of years, still knowledge of God will not change, So like that, Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has the willpower in the sense that there is no force for Him to do things, That is one level, at the level of the divine essence. There is another level about His actions, that there is a willpower there, that when Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala decide to create, there is a will to create things. These are attributes of His actions. So there are two levels for that, But originally it is one of the attributes of His divine essence. We cannot say that God has no willpower. You see, it is attribute of perfection and beauty. And we said all attributes of perfection and beauty are for Him subhanahu wa ta'ala. Now, in certain traditions, one is asking Imam Sadiq alayhi salam, Asim ibn Humayd, he said, I asked, لم يزل الله مريدا, Allah is continuously willing. Then Imam asked, he said, the willing to do will not be there unless there is something else to be wished to be created. But Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala was knowing and mighty, then He has the will, power and create. So Imam here explain it as an attribute of deeds of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, not attributes of the essence. You say the essence, the knowledge is there, the might is there, but if He did not create, then the willpower is not there. So here is explaining it on the level of what? We said, level of actions. So there are two levels to understand it. In the level of His deeds, yes, He wants to create, and the things are created day by day. So naturally, these are all willed and wished by Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So Imam here is explaining, because probably in mind of that the creation is also to be in the sense of eternity. He said, no, the creation, when Allah will to create and things are created one after the other, so it is one of the attributes of His actions of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Safwan ibn Yahya asked Abu al-Hasan alayhi salam, which is is said about Imam Musa ibn Ja'far or Imam al-Ridha, both are called Abu al-Hasan. He said, what is the irada which is related to Allah, and what is the will if it is related to the creatures? So there are two levels. We may relate willpower to Allah, and we may relate the willpower to people. So he said, what is the difference? Imam alayhi salam replied, the willpower from the people is their consciousness and what is happening after that. That their awareness, thinking, awareness, try, decide, and all those are levels of actions till he do something. So all that called the willingness. But he said that is not possible for Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because these are contingent things. And he said, because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will not think and then decide and then try and then move, and all those levels are not possible for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And he said, the will of Allah is His creation, nothing else, He tells things be and it will be without pronouncing it. Be, I say be, pronounce it. So without pronunciation. God say be without pronouncing something and without mentioning it by tongue and without deciding in the psychological way that we have or thinking about it. And there is no way to understand that as you cannot understand the divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So there is no shape for Allah and you cannot have a shape for that. So you see, Imam is explaining that we should differ the meaning of willpower with human being and what we related to Almighty Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Again, Muhammad ibn Muslim asking Imam al-Sadiq alayhi salam about it, then Imam said, Al-Mashi'a muhditha. The willpower is contingent, and Imam alayhi salam here is talking about the willpower at the level of creation, or let us say deeds and actions. So that is contingent, because every day a new creature and every day a new willpower is contingent. But that is not, as we said, the willpower of the divine essence. Because that is part of the divine essence, so Allah has the willpower there. So this is at a position of a creation, and that is at a level of divine essence. There is two levels for it, Again, lot of details are coming about these, which the scholars mentioning, but in general, I try to elaborate the different views and how difficult is its understanding, and how the Muslim scholars are pinpointing the exegesis of the attributes of Allah in such a way which will not create any complexity within the divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because that is the pure tawheed that we believe, and all explanations should be given in such a way that will not make parts within the divine essence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So to say, in short, that irada is the willingness of Allah, as He has the knowledge, has the might, has the life. He has willingness that He is not forced to create, and He has the freedom and has the willpower, and He can create with His willpower. That is the attribute of His divine essence. When it comes for creatures to be created, then that willpower is contingent. Here is not the same, because that depends on a creation, and creation is coming one after the other, so that willpower is there. والحمد لله رب العالمين وصلى الله على محمد وآله الطاهرين اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد.